There's another suggestion that I thought, but my mother, she's in a mental state where she can't remember, or in this disability that is completely disabled from my mom functioning, taking care of herself, is ask my mother if this guy ever threatened my mother horrifically. I don't remember, like I said, very much of it other than the door being wide open and the wind was gusting through the house, and my mother was like sort of frantic and very quiet and submissive as this guy was leaving that very same day, like within an hour. I don't remember who picked him up, if it was taxi or if it was this lady with this baby, but he got up and he left. I don't know where he went. I don't know, never heard and saw this guy again, other than I talk about that we went to a house once and it was with my uncle, and we went to this guy's house, and I talk about that there was this guy, I think he owned like a bunch of lawnmowers, and I talked about this and drew pictures of it. But I don't know if it was like a family gathering or what the situation was. It was like, because we didn't know these people, and it was like on a farm, kind of ranch kind of thing, and I remember it just raining really, really heavy. And I talked about this already in my videos, but if there's anything that I want to suggest, it's probably going to be a game changer to everything, is if this guy threatened my mother horrifically, which he probably did before he left, and said, which would fall right along the line of his criminal activity and the horrific rape, is probably threatened my mother horrifically not to say anything. Otherwise, he was going to come back to the house and he was associated with some sort of family members that were distant. I'm sure this guy didn't tell any of our family members. I don't think he did, like in graphic detail. But if you can find out, that's the way, in my opinion, you can ask. Go ask my mother. And, I don't think Frankie's in any kind of way a healthy state either. But ask both of them and said, did this guy ever threaten you directly, or my mother, and says if they ever said anything that they were going to kill my mother. I wouldn't doubt it because, I talked about that, it's the only time ever in my life where my mother was in the kitchen and she totally froze. And I talk about this in my other video where she could hear the screams and she just was crying in pain, screaming. And like she couldn't do anything, and she was just like quivering and like totally frozen. So ask my mother and Frankie, but other than that, I'm the only one. But other than that, ask if this guy ever threatened my mother, because that's why maybe my mother didn't want to ever say anything about any of the other rapes, because you don't want this guy hurting any of our other children. Obviously, Julian's twin is a different city, and what's going on with my mother is trying to survive, and you can't do anything about it because guess who the monster is? And if the police aren't questioning, I don't understand why, in my opinion, when my father died and me and Frankie are in the car, my mom, I don't understand why somebody couldn't have just asked Frankie, who were all the people that, if everyone knew that Miguel did what he did they tell Frankie, who are all the people that ever did this to you? Because then you get the information that you were looking for the entire time. And this is 20 years ago, but like I said, I truly think that nobody's going to care enough to go into that level of detail, especially over 20 years ago. But the only reason that I think someone would now, because obviously you got my mother a beautiful house and she got to raise her kids, and I don't know anything about that. I have no earthly idea what other life that she lived. I don't have the slightest idea what she went through in her life. After her accident, her leg being crushed by a forklift, and you'd be able to find out if she ended up, you'd be able to find out that information, but I don't think anybody cares enough to say, we care about your life, we want to know all the details, because you already bought her a house to help her and raise her kids, and this is an entire lifetime, that I think that somebody should have asked and said to Frankie and my mother, but if my mother can't talk and she's disabled, and Frankie possibly wasn't questioned, well, then that is an entire sabotaging situation. We can also ask Frankie, did Frankie tell any of the other relatives? Did Frankie tell any of the other relatives anything? Like, did y'all have a group meeting where y'all have like that TV show that they have, what do they call it, intervention, where all the family members are in with a psychiatrist, and you sit down and talk to my mother and say, well, what are you going to give her? What are you going to do to help live a normal life, make a beautiful life, and y'all were successful at doing that. But it came at a degree that nobody knew about. So it's to help my mother. I wasn't in the picture. Last 20 years, since my father died, my mother was there for me up until once I turned 18. She moved at the back of the house. She moved back home. I moved out of my apartment, and I lived with my mother with her boyfriend for like 6 months, I think it was, or 8 months, 6 to 8 months. And then I never heard from my mother again because she had that accident and she disappeared. Her twin, obviously, someone had ordered her to, because I had no idea about the twins. But you can at least figure out, because if I'm not in the picture 20 years and I've been associated with my mother's twin the entire time, well then, you fooled me, because I didn't know any about even Julian's twin up until I was into my late 30s. So it probably would be beneficial to whatever closing of whatever you wanted to make this into. And I hope the best for my mother. I love her, but I honestly believe that she needs my help. But if I'm not allowed or to participate in being fooled, there's nothing that I can do about that. Those people that did that, the psychiatrist, the dream makers over's house, and did all that, they're in charge. I'm not in charge of anything. But I just know that as monstrous as they made me look toward my mother and my brother Frankie, and then I was nothing, and I was just trash, and I was just worthless, and I was just a bad-mouthing kid, and I was just a monster, they were good at that. And that's all I was amounted to do. And I know that that wasn't the case. But they were successful in doing what they did. I hope the best with the psychiatrist, the psychologist, whoever's doing the investigation, whether it's with Sarah and Ken also again, and Kenneth, well then, go ask them. I don't know what to say. But that's what happened. And I was the storyteller to say what had happened. So, I hope the best. I'm not the one in charge, and I haven't been. I was taken away from my mother many years ago. It's very hard because I was talking to her twin the whole entire time, thinking I was talking to my mother. These psychologists were, and these people that worked in teams really devoured the situation horrifically. I know that they couldn't do anything. They did help my mother, and it must have been very magical. I can only imagine my mother was crying that had a house and all that great stuff. It was great, but they should have asked Frankie, in my opinion. How many people did, and they should have asked my mother, but if my mother has a disability, I don't know how they raise their kids and what. If it doesn't matter, and it's just trash, memory, doesn't matter, then that's all it was. Because I didn't get anything out of it other than being raped as well.